Hi students, welcome to the BYJU'S Hindu News Analysis for 7th of October 2018. So let's get started. So let's look into the topics that we will be discussing for the day. One is the picking out silent ghosts in the deep. Then we'll be looking into the PepsiCo order to compensate women for refusing prize money. This is to do with the trade practices. Then Operation Samudra Maiti in reference to the Indonesian earthquake as well as the tsunami. Then East Ghats face loss of forest cover, which is impacting the endemic plants. And then we will look into a second look at Lexia and then Turbidity Current. Western Ghats is home to Eurasian Auto. We'll be discussing certain facts with respect to Eurasian Auto, and then we will end it up with the prelims practice questions as well as the mains based question. So let's get started and look into the first article. So the first article here speaks about the ghost nets. So what are these ghost nets? So basically when we say about the ghost nets, so these are the nets that are abundant or lost or otherwise discarded fishing gear systems. So what we consider in this particular case is that these are the nets that are used by the fishermen who go about disposing of in the ocean aquatic ecosystem. They chuck it or they throw it into the aquatic ecosystem in the ocean. Why do they do it? This is because when you see the nets, right, they are usually worn out, and because it is worn out, this is one of the easiest ways to get rid of them. And also sometimes when the net gets stuck into one of the rocks, they usually redundantly let go these things instead of getting it back. But what is the major impact of this? The major impact of this is the environmental pollution and how this is traumatizing the entire aquatic ecosystem. So let's try and understand everything that is important from this article perspective. So what this article goes on to say is it has given us certain important statistical data. So first let us try to understand certain statistical data. So it says in 2010 a marine fishery census by the Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute said there were about 1,30,000 gill nets and drift nets in operation in India. So the United Nations Environmental Program in a 2009 study titled Abandoned, Lost or Otherwise Discarded Fishing Gear states that almost 6,40,000 tons of all fishing gear, approximating up to 10% of the total usage, is either lost or discarded in our oceans annually in bad weather or when get stuck to the rocky bottom. And then further, according to the Marine Mammal Center, it is estimated that ghost nets account for approximately 10% of all the marine debris. Every year 1 lakh marine mammals die from harmful effects of plastic, fishing nets as well as trash in our systems. So because of all the statistics that we currently have, what we see is two important things. One, it is becoming a threat to the entire aquatic ecosystem in the oceans, causing a lot of pollution in the atmosphere as well as in the oceans. And then what we see is because of these nets that are chucked by the fishermen, this is causing deaths to the number of organisms that are residing in the oceans. So what we will see in this particular context is what are the various concerns. So when we look into the number of concerns, what we see is that there are number of organisms that get entangled. Let's say for example the fishes, the dolphins or the sea turtles, the dugongs, the crocodiles, the seabirds, the crabs, all these creatures including certain humans, that is when we have the ocean divers who enter into it to look into the research as well as understand how the ocean works. Even these people, that is the ocean divers, are also entangled in this net. So the major concern is the entanglement of all these species, and the minute they are entangled, what happens in this case is they can cause the killing of marine wildlife including certain vulnerable species which destroy the benthic ecosystem. So the major problem is it leads to lot of killing of the organisms in the ocean environment. And now what we have to understand is, now that there are certain organisms which get trapped into this nets and there are certain fishes which also gets trapped into it, what would be the resultant is that the economy is in loss. How is that the economy is in loss? Obviously when we see the economy, what we see is the fishing sector, and when we speak about the fishing sector, it is obviously the catch of the fishes, and this is the catch that was supposed to be lifted off from the oceans and was supposed to be sold in the markets. But what is happening in this case is, now that these fishes are entangled, let's say at the bottom of the ocean or near the or stones that are stuck in the oceans. They are not coming out of the water, they are not the catch for the fishermen, and now because they are not able to come, they are not able to lift it out of the water. This can also impact the livelihood of the people, and at the larger perspective this will impact the fishing sector. So on one side it is killing all those important fishes and dolphins, and at the other side it is indirectly resulting in the loss to the economy. How? Because all these fishes that were supposed to be lifted off and they were supposed to be sold in the market are now entangled, they are there in the water and they are killed within the water. And what we also need to understand is, as spoken earlier, since these nets are made up of plastic, there is a large scale pollution. And what happens is, sometimes these plastics that are twined down and then when they are broken into pieces, this can be taken or ingested in the form of food by certain organisms. And when it is ingested in the form of food by certain organisms, we also take up these fishes. So we do consume fishes, and when this fish is taken by us, this can have a health impact. How is that it can have a health impact? It is due to the effects of this plastic that has been chucked by the nets. So once it is ingested by the fishes, this fish is ingested or eaten by the humans, and when it is eaten by the humans, this can cause the health impact. So as in all, this will be a major problem to the organisms themselves, this will be a problem to the economy, and this is a major threat to the humans as well. So what we need to consider in this particular case is that as a whole this is a major problem, and in order to address this problem we need to come up with certain measures. So what are the measures taken? So these are the measures that have been taken as per the article. So it says the Temple Adventures, which is one of the recreational scuba diving operator, has been conducting ghost net removal programs since its inception in 2008 with the support of the Wildlife Trust of India since February 2018. And there is Temple Reef Foundation, which organizes Dive Against the Debris station, where certified divers volunteer for underwater cleanups. And then there is Thiruvananthapuram based NGO Friends of Marine Life, who collected 400 kgs of ghost nets in 19 minutes from several places off the coast of the Kerala capital. And then what we also see is a government move, that is the Maharashtra Tourism Development Corporation, Indian Institute of Scuba Diving and Aquatic Sports, has also begun retrieving ghost nets along the coast of Sindhudurg in collaboration with UNDP Global Environmental Facility, training youth from coastal communities. So these are all the NGO based things, but there are certain problem areas, and these problem areas have to be addressed. So what is the way forward? So when we look into the way forward, right, currently what we use is the plastic nets. So can there be an optional? Yes, we do have certain optionals. Let's say for example we are using certain biodegradable nets. So what do we mean by these biodegradable nets? Let's say for example there are coils, right? So these coils that are used from the coconut can also be used as an option. Apart from the nets, that is the plastic made nets, what we can basically go on to do is we can basically go on to use the biodegradable nets. So as and when it would be able to decompose naturally under the water. So the first option that we have in this case is use of biodegradable nets rather than the plastic in this case. And also what we have to do is, we did discuss that the fishermen community, majority of them are actually getting back the nets, but there are few people who are actually chucking the nets in the aquatic ecosystem. So what we need to do in this case is we need to provide certain financial incentives. So what do we mean by it? Let's say for example, in case we are able to provide them certain money for getting back the stone or the worn out nets, we would be able to incentivize them so that they don't have this practice of indulging in such negative things. So what we are doing in this case is we are providing them certain finances so that this acts as an incentive for all those fishermen to get back the worn out net or the damaged net instead of chucking the same in the ocean water. And the third important thing that we have to understand is, after you get these nets through the financial incentives or on the voluntary basis, what we have to do in this particular case is how are we going to recycle. So we need to have a recycle mechanism. So basically come up up with certain improvised collection as well as disposal as well as recycling schemes and mechanisms, so that this will obviously facilitate proper disposal of this old, damaged as well as retrieved fishing gears. So this is the third important point that we need to understand. And apart from this, what the government should be able to do is it should be able to bring about the awareness to all sets of people, especially those people who are going to the waters, about the damages that it causes to the ocean as well as to the people. So bring about an awareness to all the people in the system, so that they are also aware of what is its problems, and then they'll be able to stop the menace of this ghost nets. So this is what we need to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says PepsiCo ordered to compensate women for refusing the prize money. So what is the context here? So the context here is that PepsiCo during 2010 had promised one of the women that she would be provided about 50 lakh reward prize, and then what happened during this period was the company failed to provide her the prize money. So she goes up to the consumer court, and now this consumer court, that is the state consumer court in Delhi, has actually promised and said that PepsiCo should be paying a compensation by paying over 50 lakh. So what is the context here? So what we will be discussing is with respect to the unfair trade practices. So the first question that pops up is, what is this unfair trade practices? So when we say unfair trade practices, basically what it goes on to say is, in case there is a particular manufacturer who is producing certain goods, or in case there is a company which is providing certain services, in case they go about providing certain services or goods to a wrongful means. So what are the wrongful means? It is either through the deception or through the fraudulent means or through unethical methods. So if any company engages in such activity of selling their product, that is the good or providing of services, through deception, fraudulent means or unethical methods, such practice is called as the unfair trade practices. So basically this unfair trade practices include the mispresentation. So you have a product, and when you're mispresenting a particular product like a genuine product, that comes under the unfair trade practices. Then you have a false advertising. Though your product or service does not intend to meet that particular dimension, or it does not provide that particular result, in case you go about falsifying the overall idea of this particular product or a service, then it is called as false advertising or representation. Or for example, let's say in this particular case, what Pepsi has basically gone on to do is, it has said that it is falsely going to give free prize or gift offers. So even in this case, in case the company promises that it is going to provide certain gifts, and this happens to be a false gift, or it is lying to the customer, even that becomes the unfair trade practices, as it is done by Pepsi in this particular case. And apart from this, in case we have deceptive prices that are there, so let's say for example, there was a particular product, and this product was initially sold at 10 rupees, and the weight of it was with somewhere around 100 grams, and now what has happened is the price is just the same and the weight is reduced from 100 to over 50, but what is promised in this case is that it will be 100. So even in this case, one is the deception of the prices and then the deception of the weight overall. So in all these cases, in case any product is being sold and there is an intended standard that any manufacturing company has to follow, in case they are not following all these manufacturing standards and they are not compliant to these manufacturing standards that have been set, then such things will be falling under the unfair trade practices. So what is important for us is to understand certain laws. So what are the laws that are been taking place? So when we look into what are the laws that are taking place with respect to the unfair trade practices, we basically have two important laws. So what are these two important laws? One is with respect to the Competition Act, the other is with respect to the Consumer Protection Act. So it is these two acts which help the consumer in order to put their grievances and get their grievances addressed. So this is what we need to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says picking up the pieces. So what we have to understand is that there was one of the earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia's Sulawesi Island. So the first point from the prelims perspective is, where is the Sulawesi Island? So the Sulawesi Island is in Indonesia. So this can be a potential question in your prelims examination. So kindly keep a check of the island's name. So what has been done in this particular case is India has provided its lending hand to Indonesia, and then under the Operation Samudra Maitri, India is providing certain relief efforts. So let's try and understand certain important factual data. It says it is a relief effort launched by India to assist the victims of 2018 Sulawesi earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia. This may not be important, but let's understand what if it pops up in the examination, so we will have a fair bit of an idea. But usually what UPSC asks is what is Operation Samudra Maitri, or which was the island that it was represented in. All this is the factual data that UPSC can ask, but let's have a fair bit of an idea on the other facts as well. So two aircraft, that is C-130J as well as C-17, departed carrying onboard medical personnel and relief material. C-130J aircraft is carrying a medical team on board along with tents and equipments to set up a field hospital. The C-17 aircraft is carrying medicines, generators, tents and water to provide immediate assistance, and three Indian naval ships, INR Stir, Sujata as well as Shardul, have also been mobilized to carry out humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So this becomes a very important point from the prelims perspective. So this is all we will have to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says Eastern Ghats face loss of forest cover under endemic plants. So we have to understand two important facts. So what are the facts? So the Eastern Ghats is spread across Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So why are we discussing this? Because there was one of the questions that was asked previously in the prelims, and that was to do with the Western Ghats. So UPSC has asked questions with respect to Western Ghats as to which are the states that the Western Ghat passes through. So because it is asked with reference to Western Ghats, we will also have to know which are the states that it passes through the Eastern Ghats. So what are the states? One is the Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka as well as Tamil Nadu. Kindly remember Karnataka is also part of this belt because some areas go through this particular area. And apart from this, we also need to know other important fact, and that is what are the rivers that passes through the Eastern Ghats. So when we look into the rivers that passes through it, there are four important rivers. One is you have the Godavari, and then you have the Mahanadi, then you have Krishna, and then Kaveri. So these are also the four important rivers that passes through this research. So what we have to understand in this case is that there were certain researchers from the University of Hyderabad who studied the historical maps and satellite images from 1920 to 2015 to understand the changes in land use as well as land cover. So what they basically go on and come up with certain results. So what they basically go on to say is that there are certain parts in this particular area where the forest cover that was there at the originality is reduced, and now what we see is almost there is a loss of about 60% from its original land area over a span of about 100 years. So the next question that pops up is, why is there the reduction of land? What was there at originality? Why is it now replaced and there is less amount of land in the Eastern Ghats is the next question that pops up. For this, what we need to understand is the areas that is there along the Eastern Ghats, majority of these areas have been converted into what is called as the agricultural fields, and certain other regions have been converted into scrub as well as grassland, so that this becomes a bare area for grazing of livestock. And what is the other causes that we have to think is, one is the major part is played by the agriculture, that is diversion of land for the agriculture. Then we have something to do with the mining. So when we look into certain important factual data, what it says is in 1920 the mining area was only 622 square kilometer, but in 2015 it had increased to about 962 square kilometer. So what are the two major factors? One is the agriculture, the next is the mining. So apart from this, we have certain developmental projects, that is the construction of dams, the roads and so on. So this has also made a major impact, and that is why we face a loss of forest cover. And because of all this, what we see is a threat to the species, and this is about 2600 plant species that are endemic to this particular region can have a serious threat. So these are the repercussions. So what is the way forward? So when we look into the way forward, what we have to understand is currently all the studies that have been done by the important research institutes, the NGOs and government in specific is majorly focusing on the Western Ghats as well as the Himalayas, but there has been complete neglect of the Eastern Ghats. So what this article goes about speaking is, you have been focusing a lot on the Western Ghats, you have been focusing a lot on the Himalayas. So what you also need to do is, you will have to pay your interest on these areas, which includes the Eastern Ghats. So because this is also ecologically important, please make sure that you go about starting a research understanding of this particular area. Why is this area important? It is because this provides the monsoon break for the northeast region as well as for the southwest monsoon region. So because it provides the break to the northeast monsoon as well as the southwest monsoon, that is the prime reason as to why this part of Eastern Ghats becomes very important. So what it goes on to further say is that the government needs to understand that this is a very ecologically important place, and what the government needs to do is, it needs to provide its focus and provide funds to these areas so that there is constant studies as well as monitoring programs, and then these monitor programs are able to impact and bring about a change in this area, is what this article all about. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article speaks about Lexia. So what is this article all about? So when we look into Lexia, what it basically goes on to say is, for a particular age, any person for that matter will have certain reading abilities. So he would be able to read, he would be able to write, and this transforms with age. For a particular age, he would be able to read so much and he would be able to write so much. But for an intended age, if he is not receptive of the knowledge, he is not able to read and write, such person is what is called as a person suffering from dyslexia. So what is the importance and why are we discussing this? It is because October, this month is usually celebrated as the month of World Dyslexia Awareness. So because it is celebrated as the World Dyslexia Awareness Month, that is why the article is being discussed. So let's understand one of the important concepts that has been spoken in this particular article. So what is neuroplasticity? So when we are speaking of neuroplasticity, basically it is about the ability of the brain to readjust according to time. Let's say for example, you have a short term goal, you have a medium term goal, and then you have a long term goal. So all these goals that you have within your brains have a certain imprint, so it will categorically design its thought process according to it. So when we say neuroplasticity, it is one of the muscle building capacities of the brain. So this is the ability of the brain to fine tune, change and bring about changes every now and then, so that it is able to adapt to new receptive knowledge as well as information. And one of the most important point according to neuroplasticity is the practice. So as much as we practice, the brain fine tunes to itself, and the more the practice is, the more with respect to this practice and this imprint of practice that goes, that is how the muscle building of the brain happens. And this is what neuroplasticity is all about. So neuroplasticity basically means fine tuning the thought process as per the need of that person, so that he is able to retrieve the data, he is able to hold on to the information as well as knowledge over a period of time, and those knowledge which are continuously reciprocated, practiced, will be retained for a larger period, is what the neuroplasticity is all about. But when we understand the dyslexia principle, right, these people have a problem with neuroplasticity. So they are not receptive to the knowledge, they are not able to read and write as per that particular age. So the main problem is these people suffer from the problem of neuroplasticity. So what is ideally seen with the normal people, these people are not able to do it, and that is why these people have the problem of neuroplasticity. So the next important point we need to understand is, what are the causes for this particular thought? Why are people suffering from this particular dyslexia? So what we will have to understand is, one is to do with the genetic causes. So in case any of the person, they have a strong history of dyslexia, that is the family has a strong history of dyslexia or other learning abilities, then it can be pushed on to the future generation. So the first basic cause is it has a strong genetic link to it. And apart from that, in case there is a premature birth, so if there is a premature birth in certain cases, even that can act as a major problem. And apart from this, the exposure during the pregnancy to the nicotine drugs, in case a woman is pregnant and she is exposed to nicotine drugs or to certain alcohol which is going to affect the fetus, even that will act as a problem. So these are the major causes as to why dyslexia may occur. But what is the concern? Why are we discussing this article? So when we look into the concerns part, right, majority of the people who are suffering from this disease are the major dropouts in the schools. So we are planning to make it a universal education program. We are wanting to give education to number of children. Sustainable developmental goal also speaks about universal literacy. So in case we are not able to provide this aspect, what is the problem right now? The number of people who are actually venturing out into schools are dropping out of the schools. Another important point that we have to understand is there was one of the studies that was done in the United Kingdom. So according to this study, in year 2012, it showed that 53% of the 2029 prisoners were dyslexic compared to 10% of the UK population. So because they are not receptive to the knowledge, because they are not receptive to the information, they are not able to learn with time, these people engage in criminal activity. So in order to stop the dropouts, in order to curb the menace of criminal activity, that is why we need to come up with certain programs. And what are the programs? How are we going to address these concerns is what this article all about. As we have discussed, this sustainable developmental goal model, that is the fourth, which speaks about the literacy throughout the world, actually wants to communicate that the world is one such place where every person needs to be provided the education. But what is the problem here? Nearly 8 to 10% of the people have this dyslexia problem. That is, out of 100, nearly 8 to 10 people suffer from this particular problem. So in order to address this issue, what we need to do is we need to bring about certain reforms. So what are the reforms that we are speaking about? Basically, we will have to reform amongst three fronts. So the first important point that we have to understand is from the teacher's perspective. So not every student will be the same way, right? So what the teachers will have to ideally understand is we need to give them the awareness about the dyslexia. So all teachers should understand how the brain works. In case there is a person suffering from this particular issue, then the teacher will have to understand and bring about changes and need to be flexible. So on one side, you have the teacher who needs to ignite passion in a student. On the other side, the education system needs to be flexible, and then it has to accommodate the diversity in the classroom. So the first front is the teacher should be able to understand, and we should be able to give them awareness that there are certain people who are not receptive to the educational knowledge. So be flexible and be very good to these people so that they are able to take up the knowledge from your side. And the second important point that we have to understand is from the parents' perspective as well as from the doctor's perspective. Most of the doctors, that is the pediatrics, they actually fail to understand this problem. So what we need in this particular case is that pediatricians who are not aware of dyslexia and parents who are not aware of this needs to be given an awareness program as to how these people can be nurtured as well as encouraged. And the third important point that we need to understand is from the government perspective, and that is policy making. India has already taken a head start, that is, it has already made this a part of the Right of the Persons with Disability Act. So India has already introduced a law which is called as Right of Persons with Disability Act, and this particular provision, dyslexia, is already a part of that particular act. But what we need to understand is that this act is struggling to find the right ways, the implementation bit. So what the government needs to do is it has to make sure that it brings about certain reforms in this particular aspect, and then brings about certain changes and momentum into this act so that the implementation happens on the right code. So what is the conclusion bit? So we understood that these are the people who are suffering from the right to get the receptive knowledge. So in in order to bring about the change, what we need is adaptability, and we have to bring about social reform. And when we are able to do it, we would be able to reduce the drop rates as well as other incident problems that we face with respect to the dyslexia students. So this is what we need to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article speaks about turbidity current. So what is this article all about? Let us take, for example, there is a lake, and then there is this slight slope in the lake. So on a period, let's say for example there is large scale sand and sedimentation content that is present here. It would be able to sustain this sediment as long as there is no pressure within this particular lake. But let's say there is a slight earthquake, or let's say there is a slope that is actually broken. So the moment this happens, what you see is this sediment collapses, and as this sediment collapses, what you see is a sudden rush of this sediment along the lake. This particular act of avalanche type of report. So we know how the avalanche happens in the mountain areas, right? If the same avalanche happens in the lake area, such thing is called as the turbidity current. So when the capacity of the sediment not to hold on to this particular land, and then it pushes off, and then there is sedimentary collapse, this is called as the turbidity current. What happens in here is, it happens majority of the times in the ocean currents, but this can also happen in the lake. So in the oceans, what can happen is, we have the continent and we have the continental shelf. So because of the earthquakes or because of the certain tsunamis that strikes the ocean, this is a normal thing that happens in the ocean. So what is the resultant here? So the turbidity currents can change the physical shape of the sea floor by eroding large areas of this particular area, creating the underwater caryons. And when this happens, what this could lead to is, these currents would be able to deposit huge amounts of sediment wherever they flow. So as and when there is this avalanche type of movement, it takes with itself the sediment, and then it leads to deposition of the sediments in and around the area of the lake, which is usually seen in oceans as well. So what we need to understand is that there are certain concerns that this article voices. So we did discuss that majority of the times it happens in the oceans when there is earthquake as well as tsunami. But what is the problem? So the problem right now is that when there is this turbidity current, it can impact a lot of pipelines. So what it goes on to say is, in case we are able to detect this turbidity current, we would be able to avoid the damages that it can cause to the pipelines, the communication cables, as well as other seafloor structures. Apart from this turbidity current are still a threat as people place more and more cables, pipelines, and other structures on the seafloor. And the other important concern it has voiced is that turbidity currents are also important to petroleum geologists, because they leave behind layers of sediment that comprise some of the world's largest soil reserves. On one side, it goes about damaging the pipelines and communication channels, and because these sediments are going into the ocean waters, it fills in those areas where there are petroleum reserves. We would not be able to find out the petroleum results because of the sedimentation stock that it lays on these areas, is what this article goes on to speak. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says Western Ghats is now home to Eurasian Auto. So when you look into the article, majority of the article is just discussion, but what is the point of importance is the Eurasian Auto. So what we need to understand is from the prelims perspective. So let's discuss what it says. It says the IUCN status for the Eurasian otter is near threatened. It is a semi-aquatic mammal native to Eurasia, and animals are hunted for their pelts and for use of food, and they are protected by the Wildlife Protection Act. So this is all we have to understand from this article. Rest of things are redundant, which is not important from the examination perspective. So moving on, let's look into the practice questions. So as discussed yesterday, when you look into the question, read the question, pause, and then we will have the discussion. So which of the following are correctly matched? This is with respect to the GI tag. So you have the Banganpalli mango, which is for Andhra Pradesh, Etikoppa toys of Karnataka, Kadaknat chicken of Madhya Pradesh. So the options are 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 3, as well as all of the above. So which of them are correctly matched? It is 1 and 2. So the option for this is C 1 and 3. Why? Because Etikoper toys are also from Andhra Pradesh, so the GI tag is for Andhra Pradesh and not for Karnataka. So this is a wrong answer because it does not belong to Karnataka, it belongs to Andhra Pradesh. So the answer for this is C 1 and 3. So the next question is, Caspian Sea is surrounded by which of the countries? Tajikistan, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Russia as well as Kazakhstan. So when you look into the map, the answer for this would be 3, 4 and 5, and that is Azerbaijan, Russia as well as Kazakhstan. So let's look into the map. So it says all the Caspian Sea is surrounded by is Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Azerbaijan and Russia. So one of the ways that you can remember this name is by the word Tariq. So it is for the date. So what you would be able to remember is, in case you remember the word Tariq, then you will know all the countries that have been surrounded around the Caspian Sea. But there is a slight confusion. So what is the confusion here? The T is not for Tajikistan, but instead it is for Turkmenistan. That's the only thing that we have to understand. And I here stands for not Iraq, but it is Iran. So kindly remember these facts. And moving on, let's look into the main space questions. The contempt of court insulates the judiciary from interference, but is it the right time to look into it, to have a check on its privileges, critically analyze? And the pre-legislative scrutiny is the first step towards greater transparency in lawmaking. Comment. So kindly write all your answers on the comment section. We will also look into it and give you relevant feedback for the same. But the most important thing is, have the peer review so that you would be able to discuss amongst yourselves, so that in case anything matches the UPSC standard, like that comment so that it comes up in the comment section. So this is all we will have to understand for the day. Thank you so much. All the best.